Cindra, welcome to the show. You conducted a study called the 2025 National Research Study on Confidence. Can you please tell us more about the study and your most surprising finding?
Absolutely. Yeah, we were really looking at what are people nationwide thinking about confidence. I have a new book coming out next September with Simon and Schuster on confidence. We wanted to really see what was going on, and the most surprising finding, Elon, is that 1 in 2 Gen Zers. So a Gen Zer is defined as the ages of 18 to 29, consistently or frequently feel like they're not enough. So 1 in 2 Gen Zers, which is very surprising. I have 2 Gen Zers that I am a parent of, 2 boys, and it's actually really scary to know that you know half of a generation feels like they're not enough, and this is really important because they are the next generation of our workforce. They are the next generation to lead us, right? And so we all need us to be really mindful of how we are building our own confidence, but then the confidence of Gen Zers. And our study also found like practical things that leaders can do to make or break confidence, why confidence is really important to the bottom line, and how it actually impacts revenue in organizations as well as productivity, and really how confidence isn't just like a personal issue anymore. It's like an organizational issue that we need to address.
1000%. With that being said, I want to get into your book that you already have out, not next September, but the book you already published. I love the description of this book. You described it, as 10 practices that the world's best use to gain the high performance edge. Could you talk about that?
Absolutely. So, my PhD is in performance psychology, and what I really study is what allows people to thrive and be their best more often. And that's what my degree is in. So, I wrote this book, Beyond Grit, which covers 10 practices of high performance, with this idea that, training our mind and being our best consistently actually is a practice. It's not something we're born with, but we have to develop it over time. And I'll just kind of give you the 10 practices, and then we can dive into any of these that you want. But the number one is grit. Hence why the book is called Beyond Grit, because grit has been described as the number one predictor of our success. But there's other, things that we need besides grit. Number two is purpose and understanding why you do what you do. Number three is mentally strong thinking and mastering your thinking and the voice in your head. Practice number four is self awareness. So, this is all about like knowing yourself. Five is dominate the controllables. So, this one is about focusing on what you can control. Number six is owning the moment. We know from research with 2 Harvard professors that we only spend about 47% of our waking hours in the present moment. So, we are more likely to focus on what we're not doing than what we're doing. Practice number seven is choosing empowering emotions like confidence and gratitude. Number eight is about authenticity and knowing who you really are and showing up like that. And that's a practice. Nine is the most difficult one for people to practice, Elon, and that is live and let go. So we can dive into that one if you'd like. And then practice 10 is about choosing courage over comfort. And these are, if you look at the research in performance psychology, these are 10 practices that allow people, again, to thrive, be at their best. But it's something we have to do every day, not just something that we train our mind to do once in a while.
1000% Sindra. Before we get into the ninth point, I wanted to ask when you say grit, because I think a lot of people might have different definitions for grit, what do you mean?
So I like to use the definition in the research by Angela Duckworth. She is the person who coined this term, and she describes it as passion and perseverance for your very long term goals. I think it's important to think of our purpose too, and our purpose allows us to stay connected to our goals. But really, grit is about sticking with things when it's hard, not giving up, keeping your goals in mind, and cultivating that passion and perseverance and knowing really why you do what you do. And I think, understanding your purpose is like pulling back the layers of an onion. It takes really a lot of reflection and understanding and self-awareness to really own why you do what you do.
1000%. You mentioned on one of your points, you said choosing confidence. I wanted to ask you, do you think confidence is something we can choose to do?
I do think it's something that we can choose. I think of confidence as like four things. I see it as like a feeling. that can actually come and go. And sometimes we get a little nervous and then we think we're not confident. So we have to be careful not to interpret our feelings of doubt as unconfidence. I see confidence as also a skill you can develop. So it's not something, right, we're born with exactly, but we can keep growing and developing it. And it's a decision that we make in the moment. And we know sometimes the action of confidence comes before the feeling of confidence. So,
I
raising
love
your
that.
hand, standing up in front of the room, just starting to talk, sometimes that action is more, that generates the feeling of confidence. And then I also see it as a belief in self. And I want you to think about those four parts as like going from unstable to stable. And what I mean by that is like that feeling of confidence is not very stable, but the belief in ourselves is. And I think what's important to know is that, even the best athletes in the world will say that their confidence wavers and it can come and go. It's like a thermometer, up and down based on like adversity or a tough day, or if you're a student, a tough subject that you're really struggling with. And so, no matter how old you are, I see that confidence is something we have to continue to develop and protect. And we have to protect our confidence and continue to nurture it. And that's really important because it's not just, it is a skill where we can keep on growing. And I don't think realize people always realize that.
Yeah, Cindra, I totally agree. And even this whole notion of confidence, being the action as opposed to this feeling is extraordinary. I love it. I always think about the same thing because, I know Jocko, he said one time that, you know, y like, as far as confidence goes, if you're in a war, for example, right, and your buddy is injured and you go out and you help him, it doesn't matter how you felt. You might have been scared, but just the action of confidence makes you confident. I actually had a really good guest on. He was kind of put this point, like, up another notch where it wasn't talking about confidence, but, like, if you do certain actions, that's who you become. So it's like you might not identify as somebody who's confident, but if you constantly do the actions, by definition, that makes you confident, right? There's no, like, threshold per se. I wanted to say, or I guess I wanted to ask because something that interests me a lot. You've worked with some of the best athletes in the world. I am somebody personally who looks at the best and I think like, okay, they're clearly doing something amazing. They're doing something different. They're doing something that the 99% of people aren't doing. So I wanted to ask you, for the people that might not believe it, they're like, okay, these guys are genetically talented. These guys are so much better. What are those mental practices that you think sets them so far apart from the average person?
That's such a great question. I could answer that in so many different ways, but the things that I see the most, I think are three things. I think number one, it's how they reframe adversity. And we did a study a few years ago where we asked professional athletes how they developed their grit. And it was interesting because, they said it was like their parents that helped them develop their grit or their coaches. But the thing that surprised me from this study was that three-quarters of them said actually their grit came from overcoming the most difficult moment in their lives. So, like a season ending injury or a parent's divorce or their own cancer. And these are all things that you and I, struggle with too, like, life events. And it was really how they used that adversity to fuel them. In my book, I talk about this kind of idea of the watch me mentality. And what I find particularly with among like elite athletes is that um, when they're faced with adversity, let's say they're written about in a newspaper or trashed on social media, instead of saying that, yeah, that person is right, they're like, watch me. So they use that adversity as like fuel. So that's number one. I would say number two is they cultivate a strong belief in themselves. And confidence comes in many ways. We know preparation helps you grow confidence. Releasing judgment and the past helps you grow confidence. Even setting really stretch goals that are gonna, really push you, help you develop confidence. But the most important thing that you can do to keep growing your confidence is what you say to yourself about yourself, and particularly whatever you put behind I am. Like I used to think to myself, I'm terrible at learning people's names. But then I would say that to myself and I wouldn't even try to learn people's names. Elon, I wouldn't even try, right?
Yeah.
Um, And now I say things really powerfully to myself every morning. I have a list of about 30 of the, like, attributes I want to keep growing in. And one of mine is like, I am a kind and passionate person, which, I hope that you find me passionate and kind today. And another one is, I'm the best damn keynote speaker you ever heard, because that's like how I want to keep growing. So the second thing is like how you define yourself and how you develop your identity is really going to help you thrive in those moments. I was watching this little clip of Tom Brady because I work with some football teams, and Tom Brady had these affirmations. Like one of them was, "I thrive in the biggest moments." Like that's how he identified. So guess what? He thrived in those bigger moments, right? And then the last part is, I think that the best athletes in the world have really big, courageous goals, but they learn to focus on them when the time is right. And what I mean by that is so many of us have like outcome based goals. Like I want to make blank amount of money, or an athlete might say, I want to go to the pros, or I want to be an All American or an Olympic champion. And the best know that they can use those goals to motivate them, to get them out of bed in the morning. But those outcome goals actually also create quite a bit of pressure and anxiety. So, I find the best athletes in the world are just constantly focusing on how can I get better today? What can I do today? What's my process of getting better? And then they use those process goals to motivate them every day to kind of stay focused on what they need. But those bigger goals to like push them. Maybe they might think about them once a week or once a day, but not like consistently, because that provides a lot of pressure and anxiety, particularly like leading up to a competition. My rule when I'm working with an elite athlete or any athlete in general is to not focus on those outcome goals like 24 hours in advance, because that's what just creates too much pressure and anxiety.
I love it, Sindra. So would you say that as opposed to making those, like outcome goal oriented goals, something that I like to do is make more like input goals, something you're talking about, like what can you do today? So for me, it'd be something like I'm gonna train like so for example, for me, I train MMA. We're gonna get to that in a second. I promise I'm gonna ask you a good question about that. But so I train MMA,
Oh,
and for
cool.
me, like when I'm training for a fight, it's not like, okay, I want to win the fight, that's my goal, but it's more like, okay, I want to train every day for like 2 hours, if that makes sense. That's something that you
Yeah.
see a lot of.
Yeah, and that's how I think that's an example of a process goal. Like a process goal is breaking up your outcome goal into smaller steps. And, one could be I will train 2 hours a day. One might be, I will talk to myself powerfully in these moments when I'm struggling.
Ooh, okay, I
And
like
so
that.
I think like having 3 or 4 process goals every practice every day can actually be really important. If you're a leader and you're not an athlete, you could think about, what do you need to do to show up as your best today? And that could be a process oriented goal. But I think so many people like hold those outcome goals too tight, and then they identify themselves based on the outcome goal. But we know there's a lot of danger in that, because then you start believing that you're only an elite athlete, or you're only a college student, or for me, I'm only a performance psychology practitioner, instead of like I'm all these things. And we have to kind of hold that outcome goal really loosely. Mhm.
Sure, sure.
'Cause we
I
can't always
love
control it. That's why I would say that. Mhm.
I totally agree, and I also think it's kinda reverse engineering in a way because instead of thinking in my example, I wanna win the fight, it's like, "Okay, well, what do I have to do?" Let's think about it, like, backwards. What would I need to do in order to win the fight? And I love your idea of, like, process-oriented goals and how it could be used to help you. So for me, even something you said was very interesting, like, I always say to myself, "Okay, I wanna train X amount of time per day," right? But I've never thought about something like I want to, be kind to myself or like those affirmations. I think a lot of people get the wrong idea of affirmations because it's like people have a negative tendency towards them, if that makes sense. But I really believe that
Sure.
if you can like keep repeating those phrases to yourself, then when you're in that situation, you've already trained yourself. Like it's not, I feel like people like extrapolate it so much. It's like if you wake up and think I'm gonna make $1 billion, it's just gonna be handed to you. But I think you'll be able to
Exactly.
see opportunities more often, which is very interesting. And I guess even to your point for your process-oriented goals, how much time are you gonna train? What are you gonna say to yourself in your toughest moments? Maybe even like what's your diet gonna look like? 3 good meals,
Yeah.
all of that stuff. For me, it's interesting to me to hear this because you are extremely smart on the subject. So, like I mentioned, I do MMA. What would you say for me would be something that can help me mentally? So let's say it's the day of the fight, right? And I'm nervous like I always am, and I got the butterflies and it's like, "Oh my God, everything's dragging, everything seems so long. I got a lot of pressure going on." How would you help me? Pretend I'm your client. I'm just very interested.
Okay, cool. There's a couple of things that come to my mind like right away. First, I'd love to know, when you fight your best, what does that feel like and what does that look like? And that's what we want to continue to like emulate. And there's this theory in sports psychology called the individualized zone of optimal functioning, or it's eyes off is kind of the shorter version of that. And what that means is everyone has their unique level of arousal or energy when they fight the best or when they compete the best. And so I'd love to know, how I would do that is ask you, tell me about your best fight or two ever. What did that feel like? What did that look like? And then how can you recreate those emotions? Because that emotional profile is what's going to help you fight your best. So that's one area of focus I'd have. I have the second area of focus, kind of when you said like your anxiety and the butterflies. I'd have you think about like what amount of butterflies is actually helping you versus hindering you. And we know, for example, that energy and anxiety feel the same in your body. So for example, you might have an increased heart rate or sweaty palms, or your mind might be racing a little bit. It's your interpretation of that makes it anxiety or energy, right?
I didn't know
And
that.
so yeah, that's so important just because sometimes it's like just by saying like, "Okay, I'm getting ready." I'm moving towards, my peak performance level. And of course that anxiety can be too high and we can, drain a lot of our energy if we're too anxious hours before. So many times athletes might have to distract themselves or use deep breathing or other anxiety decreasing tools because you can waste so much time thinking about the event. I had this cute little fifth grader that I worked with one time because I work with a lot of executives and um, pro athletes and leaders. And early in my career, I was doing a lot of work with like young athletes. And this little
Okay.
fifth grader came into me and was like, every time he, on the way to the games, the football games, he would puke. All right. So he would be, and what happened was he was so like, he was so excited about the game. He'd wake up at like 7 a.m. and then he'd think about the game for like 4 hours, So of course he would puke, on the way because he was so nervous. And so we used lots of different tools to help him manage that energy. And one was actually some distraction. Like he loved playing cards. So he spent an hour playing cards with his parents that morning, right? Just to keep his mind off something that he really loved. So that's what I would say for you as a fighter.
That is so interesting that you bring that up because I never thought of like the physiological effects of, energy and fear being the same. But also, I like how you talked about just now him waking up for his game and he's being excited because I feel like if that was me, it would be more like, I woke up early because I was nervous and then I couldn't stop thinking about it because I was nervous. But it's interesting how, you kind of reframe it. It made me think that I guess the same situation can have 2 different interpretations. How could I know, I guess, because 'cause we're using me as an example, how can people know the difference between them having, a lot of energy in a good way as opposed
Mhm.
to, being scared and having fear for this thing?
That's a great question. I would say, when you think about your best and what your best looks like, put a number on that in terms of energy level. Like, for example, when you think about a scale of 1 to 10, right? How do you feel when you're at your best? Like, for example, I do a lot of workshops with athletic teams, and this afternoon, right after this, I get to go work with my son's high school football team, which I'm like extra pumped about. But I'm a little actually like a little more, I have a little bit more energy than typical because it's like my son. So I know my optimal level is about a 6 or a 7. If it's a little bit more than that, then it's like too much, and I'm too
Okay,
anxious, right?
sure.
So I know that I need to be at about a 6. So I'm going to do some like breathing techniques after this just to calm myself. Um, but let's say I'm a 2, I can do some energy activities to get me up. And so I think about it as like a motorcycle. You can rev up the motorcycle or you could rev it down. You can go slower. And that needs to be the same with our bodies, as we can like bring more energy if we need it, or we need to like decrease our energy. And we can increase our energy by listening to music, jumping around, using activating imagery, doing quick breathing if we're not activated enough, right? We can lower our energy by doing slow breathing, or listening to slow music, or doing some calming imagery or meditation. And depending on the sport, and then depending on the position in the team, likely you need different types of energy. And what I love about that is, like, say when I'm working with a football team, there's a wide variety, right? Typically the quarterback needs a little bit more calm and centered. Typically the like linebacker, needs to
Oh,
have a
okay,
little bit
sure.
more like intense energy.
Okay, so it's interesting that you talk about the idea of, your optimal range of energy. I've never thought about that. And then just seeing, I guess it makes a lot of sense if you, in retrospect, know, like, okay, I perform my best when I'm here, and then you're maybe a little bit anxious, you want to get it up or do activities that increase it, or as opposed to decreasing it. Very interesting. Sindra, what is a truth meter?
Oh, I love this tool. So I wrote about it in my second book called Beyond Grit for Business. And it's a tool that you can use to catch yourself when you're in the doubt spiral and you're like listening to your head trash. So if you think about like how everyone has automatic negative thoughts, right? Like we don't choose all the thoughts we have. Sometimes they just pop in, right? And it might be right before a fight and you think to yourself, this isn't going to go very well. You got to take a step back and just notice that thought to get started. And then the truth meter includes 3 quick questions that you can use to examine that thought. And the first question is this thought even true? Okay. So let's do it with you, Elon. Um, Tell me about what might be an automatic negative thought that you might have like right before a fight.
That I'm going to get knocked out.
Okay. So I will get knocked out. And we know if you keep on focusing on that, you can't be in the moment, and the chances are probably more likely that you're going to get knocked out if that's where you're focused on, right?
Sure. Yeah.
So let's think about your next fight you have coming up. Um, is that true that you're going to get knocked out?
No, no way to know yet.
You don't know. Yeah, you don't know
Yes.
yet.
Yeah.
Okay, so it might be true, might not be true, maybe it's true, but we don't know, right? Because it's an outcome that you actually fully can't control. There's things that you can do to fight really great, right?
Sure.
Um, okay, question 2 is that thought serving you to be focused on, "I'm gonna get knocked out"? Like, is that helping you be the best version of yourself?
Definitely not.
Okay, how so?
I just feel like the more I focus on it, kinda like you mentioned it, the more likely it will happen, or I'm just not gonna perform my best.
Right, exactly. So we know it's not helping you, right? But it's just this thought that pops in, and we know that a lot of our thoughts are fear-based, and I would say, like, of course you have that thought, "What if I get knocked out?" Because that's very human of you, just to have,
Sure.
those fear-based thoughts. Because fear keeps us safe in a lot of ways. Number 3, what would be a more empowering thought that you could choose in that moment when you think to yourself, "I'm gonna get knocked out"?
I've practiced a lot, I know what I'm doing. Maybe I'm gonna knock the guy back out. I'm gonna be the first one to knock him
Perfect.
out.
Perfect, perfect. Like, I will knock him out, or, I've practiced, I'm ready for this. I have everything inside me that I need, and we know that pre-planned self-talk, what that means is like planning out what you want to say to yourself
I like that.
pre-fight. Or let's say it's between rounds and you really need to pick me up. Pre-planning them, putting them on a note card, that you can have in your corner just to read, can really help you just get that energy back. Because again, when you're fighting, especially, you're in kind of fight, flight, or freeze, right? Your brain can go there pretty quickly,
Yeah.
because it's not like um, it's a very physically demanding sport, I guess is what I would say,
Sure, sure. Yeah, yeah.
And so, I love this because our self-talk creates our identity, and what you allow to believe in your mind impacts how you feel, and then impacts your actions, and ultimately impacts like the legacy we live, right? And I find so many times people are playing small. they're playing small with their talents, their abilities because of their own inner limits and their own self-talk. And I think I'm on this earth to help people play bigger, to really help people step into their biggest, more courageous goals, and push them towards that because I think it's so easy to give into the self-doubt, or the comparison.
Yeah, I love that. Are you familiar with who Haley Perlis is?
I'm not. Tell me about Haley.
Well, I had her on my podcast. She's also a performance psychologist. So we were having a very similar conversation. And she mentioned this idea of like a lot of athletes being just scared, like intimidated of their opponents. And I resonated with it because I feel like, I played soccer growing up and I feel like I had that. So just kind of a thought that I was thinking about while you were talking.
Cool.
Cindra, thank you so much for joining the show. I really appreciate it. Where can people find you?
You can find us at mentallystrong institute.com. And I'm actually going to offer anyone a free mental breakthrough call who's listening and that felt like they were moved by what I said or what we talked about and want to learn more about mental performance or executive performance. So they can head over to freementalbreakthroughcall.com and you will have a session with myself or one of my mentally strong team members, and it'll be awesome. And we'll help you get more clarity on where you want to go and get to your goals quicker and grow your confidence and your influence, which is that's what we need to play bigger in our lives.
Awesome. And for those of you guys listening, I will see you next Tuesday. And if you want to support the podcast, make sure to join my community. You can get episodes early. You can ask my guests questions, all that good stuff. Go check it out. And Sindra, thank you again.
Thank you.